Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's stream. I'm Matt Groves, and we're going to be talking about Entity Framework Core for Couchbase today. And I have a special guest with me. It's Chris Woodruff. Would you mind introducing yourself to us, Chris?
Hey, yeah, thanks. Yeah, Chris Woodruff, everyone just calls me Woody. I'm a solution architect at Real Time Technologies, and I'm a data geek. I love everything data and especially EF core, Entity Framework Core. So I'm looking forward to this.
Seems like you're an ideal guest for this type of, like we planned it, you
Maybe,
know?
yeah, maybe I am.
All right. And Brian King is also lurking around. He's kind of helping out with comments and questions and chats. I just want to give him a shout out as well because he's helping with a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So appreciate you, Brian. Here's our agenda for today. So introductions is kind of where we're at right now. I guess to introduce myself. I'm Matt Groves. I work for Couchbase as a DevRel engineer, and mostly I work on developer-facing things like Entity Framework, for instance. So we're going to start out with an intro to Entity Framework, in case you're not familiar with it, and Chris is going to walk us through that. And that's just EF Core in general. And then we'll get to, after that, we'll look at EF Core for Couchbase specifically. We'll talk about, some of the things that it does, and we'll show a demo of some things and some integrations as well. And then Chris might have some demos along the way for his section too. And then after that, we'll talk about the future of EF Core, what doesn't work quite yet, where do we see this going? Why would you want to use it? That sort of thing. And then along the way, and certainly towards the end, we'll try to answer any questions you have. I see we also have Brant Burnett in the comments as well, who's also a .NET expert and a longtime Couchbase user. So he might also have some interesting questions or comments along the way as well. So yeah, throw your questions there in the comments, wherever you're watching, YouTube or LinkedIn or what have you, and we'll try to get to those as soon as we can. So I'm going to pass it over right now to Chris. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Chris can share his, and we'll get
Yeah,
started.
yeah, thanks. So let me share my screen. And I'm just going to share the whole thing, and we'll hopefully you guys can see my screen. There we go. So I am assuming that everyone here or everyone that's going to be watching it in the future, after it's kind of put out on all the channels, knows a little bit about EF Core, but let's just go through it a little bit and talk about it. So EF Core is first, it's 100% open source. So you can go out, you can take a look at the source code. I think that's the great thing about it, and that's how a lot of people can build these providers like Couchbase is doing. Great thing that they open sourced it. It's cross-platform, so you can run it on your Mac. I'm on a Mac right now. You can run it on Linux, and you can run it on Windows. And the last thing is, and if people remember back in the .NET framework days, there was a version of Entity Framework. It was just called Entity Framework, and it did a good job. It just wasn't as performant, so it was much slower than other ORMs and other data access technologies like Dapper. But since the EF Core and Microsoft Teams have rewritten it from the ground up, now that we're into the cross-platform .NET age, the performance is getting better and better each release. And I will say that I don't find that for what I need it for, that it is much slower than Dapper. So I know Dapper's kind of the other big data access framework for .NET. So I think they're pretty much both equal. But yeah, so that's a little bit about what it is. And it isn't ORM. So what you can think of an ORM is that we write code the ORM will take that code and create either the CRUD SQL that we need it to, depending on our database. So if I write a LINQ statement that queries a database, what Entity Framework will do is take that LINQ statement, it will create a SQL select statement, and it will send it over to the database, and the database will return the data, and the ORM will take the result set from the database and move that back into your code as entities. So it will be a queryable entity list that will come back to your application, and you get to get all the data without having to take raw data from the database and move it into your code. So, and then the last one is, what databases can EF Core use? And we'll just say that there is a multitude of databases, and it's growing constantly, as we've seen, or as we're going to see with Couchbase. So a lot of your big relational databases like SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Progress, all of the big entity or relational databases can be used with EF Core, and many of the NoSQL document databases can be used with EF Core, as we're going to see with Couchbase in just a minute. So I do want to show a couple demos, because I wouldn't be earning my keep if I didn't show some demos. So you can find all these demos out in my GitHub repository called EF Core Demos, and my username in GitHub is just C Woodruff. So you can get everything out there that I'm going to show right now. So I am going to flip over and show some code. So I am using Brighter today. So if anyone wants to know what IDE I'm using, this is Brighter. So we're going to do 4 demos. We're going to show SQL interpolated. I am awful with that word, so I apologize. Basically, it's just raw SQL. So we're going to show that we can send raw SQL over. We're going to do a like, we're going to do a filter include, and we're going to do a group by. So the first one is from. So as you can see here, we can say from SQL, and then we can send in a string that will take in, and this takes in a parameter. And the nice thing about EF Core in doing this is you're protected from injection, SQL injection security, or SQL injection harm. So it does, EF Core will send over both the string with a parameter inside of it, and then it sends over what the parameter value is, and the database will take care of connecting those. So, and it does some security in there, so you can't send in inside your parameter, send in weird stuff that you could get hurt by. So if I run this, as we will see, it just sends back, it will send back all these found people that found in the database. So you just have to believe me that this actually works. So I'm just trying to be funny. So the next thing we want to do is like. So if we do a like, we will come down and do a let me make sure that is the same one. So I've got a service, and so I have down in here, I have a search blog function, and it has a term with a wildcard like expression. So this is just saying that whatever term I send in, don't worry about what's before it, and don't worry about what's behind it. If it contains that word, send it back. And this is just going to send back any artist with the in the name of the artist name. So let's try that one. It's not the most exciting thing, but as you can see that there are many in my database, and this is the Chinook database, which is a kind of a fake music store that's supposed to be able to sell music online. So as we can see, the Black Crowes, the Clash, the Cult, the Doors, the Police, the Rolling Stones, anything with a the. But we also have some other ones, which like in the middle. So Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. So it's finding the wherever it is in the name of that string. So the next one is filtered include. And so you can see here that I've got a link statement that does have an include in it. And inside that include, I am doing a filter to further filter down to say only send back albums that with artists that have the in the title. So and then we do have a split query, which just is a efficient way of telling EF Core to actually split the query. Matt can tell you a little bit about that. I don't think it's actually supported in Couchbase currently, but if we run this, we will see that, yes. So we do have albums. So we are finding all the albums that, or we're getting back how many albums that have the in the name. So we can see that U2 has 2, Van Halen has 1. Let's see if there's any other ones. Maybe we can find, Scorpions have an album with the THE in it. So that's kind of a way that we can filter further down within the include. And that's just allowing Entity Framework to build more fine-grained queries to query our databases. And so the last one is a group by. So everyone uses group by in their select statements, but it is nice to have a group by in EF Core, and we can just say group by. This is a link statement, and we can just give it group by, and then we're just going to group by the invoice dates for the invoices that we get back. So we're just going to group all the invoices by date. And if I run that one, we can see that what we get back is basically all of the group by dates. So I'm just doing some simple sum and min and max and average, what you can do when you do a group by. So yeah. So that's a little bit about EF Core. There's many different things. If you can take a look over here in my project list, you'll see that I've got about 24 different demos that you can go through if you go out to my repository and get the code out here. But yeah, so I'm going to pass back the control back to Matthew. Hopefully that was good, Matthew. I did what you asked me to.
I think I would like to take that demo project, maybe try to connect it to Couchbase and see what passes and see what doesn't. I think that'd be a really good test run for it. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of an overview of EF Core, very popular ORM for .NET. And what I want to introduce to you today is relatively new. It was just released maybe a couple months ago, in fact, is EF Core provider for Couchbase. I think Chris was showing a relational database in his demo. Couchbase is not a relational database. It is I would say it's a distributed JSON database, sometimes called NoSQL. It's a little more than just JSON, just a JSON database, though. There's lots of things you can do with Couchbase. So, built-in cache, you can do key value access, SQL queries, full text search, vector search, geospatial, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the core of Couchbase. Now, what we have at Couchbase is something called Capella. This is our managed DBaaS, our cloud platform that contains a number of components. So the operational database there is the main thing we're looking at today. It's free, by the way. You can create a free account on Capella and get a database running. Also, AI services, something we're introducing this year. So that's things like model hosting and agent catalog and so on. We have an analytics product as well. So that has a columnar engine for really large scale analytical BI type queries, data ingestion, things like that. And app services, which is our, I want to say mobile, that's a little oversimplifying it, but it's for mobile apps, for offline first databases, on-device databases, synchronization, things like that. And of course, we've had for a long time, we've got the Couchbase server, which is the self-managed like thing you can download and run wherever you want to run it. I run it in Docker, for instance. So today, we're talking about EF Core. We're only going to be focused on kind of these areas of the entire Couchbase platform. All right, so there may be some things we could do with full text search entity framework, but I'm not going to get into that today. We're going to focus mainly on, what Chris was doing, just generating SQL queries behind the scenes. And these will work on both the Capella managed DBaaS and server if you're installing that locally. It's the same SDKs for both, and entity framework works on that SDK. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. I want to start with this little translation table. This is because many people are familiar with EF Core are likely coming from a very heavy relational database experience, right? And Couchbase is the non-relational category, but I believe there are many things about Couchbase that make it familiar to relational users, make it easier to learn. So this is kind of a translation of what it looked like in, say, SQL Server or in Couchbase. Now, it's not just different names for the same thing. There's meaningful differences, but it's a good place to start to get yourself familiar with Couchbase. So for instance, in the relational world, you have tables. In Couchbase world, you don't have tables, but you have a collection, which contains many documents, right? So that's kind of the same level of organization. And then in a relational table, you have a primary key, which could be one or more columns in that table that correspond to a key. In Couchbase, each document has its own unique key. So they're kind of similar in that they help you identify individual piece of data, but there are some details that make them a little different. But it's a good place to start to kind of look at this table and say, okay, well, in Couchbase is talking about a scope. What does that mean? Oh, it's kind of the same thing as like a schema in SQL Server. It's like a DBO in SQL Server or underscore default in Couchbase. Kind of the same concept going on there. SQL Server uses Transact SQL as its language, and Couchbase uses SQL++. One of the things that makes it very interesting and stand out among document databases is that we actually have a full SQL language for JSON data. And that's actually one of the great things with Entity Framework is that we can then translate those LINQ queries into a Couchbase SQL++ query. And so this is kind of the version 1 goals of Entity Framework Core for Couchbase, is to get to a point where you could use all the CRUD operations in Entity Framework. So read, write, update, delete, and of course, all the change tracking that comes along with that. Now, Chris didn't go over change tracking, but that's an important part of any ORM really, is to keep track of all the things you're going to change. And then at the end, go ahead and, commit those or save those changes based on all the different mutations you've collected. LINQ is another huge part that Chris spent a lot of time on. This is where you're writing a LINQ query in C#. And it translates to, in this case, SQL++ behind the scenes. Entity Framework does that translation. And then some SQL++ functions are implemented in Couchbase. Now, Couchbase has a lot of SQL++ functions, as does SQL Server and MySQL and whatever. They're not all implemented just yet, but a lot of the most important ones are implemented there. And it's just a matter of time before they're all implemented, I think. And the last thing is not really part of Entity Framework, but it's a well-known Microsoft sample app called Contoso. I think it's like a university course management type software. And so one of the goals with engineering team was, let's see if we can make the Contoso example app work with Entity Framework for Couchbase. And if we can do that, then we've got a pretty good version 1 of functionality. And so that was kind of the release goal. And there's lots of ways you can measure Entity Framework via test suites and things like that. But just a kind of the art of the possible, if you will, is to get out something that implements the entire Contoso sample so that it's a viable, MVP type of implementation, and it's a great sample app to help you get started. So if you're just trying out EF Core for the first time with Couchbase, Contoso, it's right there in the GitHub repo. I'll give you a link to it later. It's a great way to get started with the basics of Entity Framework Core. So what I want to show you today is not Contoso, but it's my own sample app, and I'll show you why in a little bit, why I'm doing my own sort of different sample app here. But let me bring it up here on the screen. Let's do this one here. So I've got a Couchbase server running locally on my computer here, and I've got this shopping, what's called a bucket in Couchbase, kind of like a database in a relational database. And this contains a default scope. So again, kind of like DBO. Within that are all these collections. And these are kind of like tables, right? So we're going to ignore all these ASP.NET ones for now. We're going to come back to that, but I want to focus on widgets specifically. So I've got a collection of widgets that I want to be able to interact with via Entity Framework. So let's go over to the web page here. This is an ASP.NET Core web page. If I go over to widgets here, you can see I've got 3 widgets in the system there, and I can go ahead and create a new widget. So let's say King Brian's widget, and it is $34.99, and I don't know, it has google.co.uk/brian.jpg, whatever, and then there's 500 of them in stock. So we'll go ahead and create that widget, and that is now created in our database via Entity Framework. And I can go ahead and make changes to it, make it more exciting with an exclamation point, and those changes are made there. And so this is just the basic CRUD operations. So I want to take you to the code that actually makes this possible. So this is the ASP.NET Core controller, widget controller. Most of this code here is just UI code. So I want to highlight specifically the Entity Framework code. So we've got this widget DbContext, which I'll show you in a second here. This is how you work with Entity Framework via these context objects. So for instance, I can take context. If I want to get a list of all the widgets, I could say context.widgets to list, and that'll give me all the widgets, and I can return that to my UI. Or if I want to find a specific widget, I can do a find and give it an ID, and it'll give me that specific widget. So this is actually an entity class of widget that's being returned to the UI, and so on. So there's create that uses a form, and edit, and delete, and so on. So let's go over to widget DbContext. This is where the actual Entity Framework stuff happens. So actually, let me go back here. If you go to the top of this controller, notice there's no Couchbase up here at all. We're just using Entity Framework. It's kind of an abstraction over Couchbase. Over in widget DbContext, however, you can see we've got a Couchbase Entity Framework. So I'm inheriting from DbContext for this class. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying when we're building entities of widget, map those to the Couchbase collection called widgets, which I already showed you in the UI. And then here's the actual entity itself, which is just a plain old CLR object, but it has a little EF icon here, if you can kind of see that. But it's just a plain C# object that we're going to use to interact with our entities. And then to set this up, the whole thing, if we go back to ASP.NET's program.cs, kind of ignore the rest of this, but look at this section here for now. We're setting up this widget DbContext as a service, and we're basically just giving it a connection string here. Here's the Couchbase credentials. Here's the URL for Couchbase. Here's the bucket and scope we want to map it to. That's it. And that's kind of one of the great things about Entity Framework is it's very low configuration, and you get a lot of power right out of the box. So we can do all these CRUD operations, link queries, and things like that with just a little bit of configuration and one DbContext class. So that's kind of the basic CRUD operations of using using Entity Framework. For it, I just called widget. It could be any sort of class, right? You can have any sort of object you want to managed by Entity Framework. So again, Chris kind of showed some of that already. I want to move on to something a little more interesting, which is integrations. But I want to pause for a second here to see if Chris had any questions, or if there's any questions in the chat that we can address, or if you have any comments, Chris. You're muted there, Chris.
I would do that. So yeah, I did play around with some of the demos, and I can say it's really fast. And it looks like you're doing everything locally, right? Where I was doing everything up in Capella, and it was a great experience. My question is, you don't store the connection string like you do for many of the relational databases, but how would you kind of store that? Because right now it looks like we have the hard-coded credentials. So how would you store those? I'm just curious, how would you store those and keep those secret in your application?
Yeah, definitely wouldn't want to do this in a production app, hard code them like this for sure.
Yeah,
So there's a couple ways to do it. Whenever I publish an app to Azure, I use like the environmental variables, right? But then you can just use the standard, like if you have your app settings JSON file, those get overwritten by environmental settings. So,
cool.
you can just pull those in that way. And it's a little different because the credentials are kind of separate from the actual connection string, right? Which is different than SQL Server, but it's the same concept, just a couple different parts.
I just wanted to bring that up for people that
Sure.
that saw that and might be a little curious on why it's different than maybe SQL Server or other relational databases that they've used.
Yep.
And that's it. That's the only question I have so far.
Okay.
So
cool. So one of the things about Entity Framework that's really, really great, I mean, we saw some CRUD operations, some LINQ, those are all fine things, right? And Chris mentioned Dapper as well. And there's lots of other great ways to access data in .NET. So what really makes EF Core stand out to me personally is the ecosystem around EF Core, is all the different integrations that can work with it. Not just plain EF Core by itself, which is fine, but all the other things around it that you can build on EF Core. So some examples that I wanted to mention, these are things that people use every day and building applications. And these are very popular different types of use cases. And with EF Core, it makes them really easy to integrate into your application. So for one is identity, right? This is where you're handling authentication, authorization, user accounts, passwords, roles, permissions, things like that. And if you are doing this all manually, it's a lot of extra work, a lot of CRUD operations you have to wire up yourself. With Entity Framework Core, you can just plug in one more class and away you go. It's all built in, so you get all those things for free. And I'll show you how that works here in a second. GraphQL is another one. So this is I'm not personally a huge fan of GraphQL, but it's obviously very popular, especially with JavaScript front ends or things like that, where you have these flexible queries, strongly typed schemas involved there, and a single endpoint for all the data. And you can query data via GraphQL. So what we'd actually get there is a GraphQL query gets translated to LINQ, gets translated to SQL. So you can go all the way down the stack there. And one of those popular libraries for that is called Hot Chocolate. So I'm going to show you that one in action. And finally,
hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, we do have a question from Robbie in the comments. So he's not a .NET person, but he's proficient in C++. So yes, so C++ probably has its own library or libraries that act like EF Core for doing ORM type of functionality. And yes, there's probably, I haven't done C++ in 30 years, so I don't know what's out there to write that can kind of abstract your database queries, but I'm sure there is. But you're right, an ORM is just a way to make writing queries easier by allowing you to write it in the language that you're writing, that you currently are using, which in our case is C#.
Right, exactly. So I don't know of any ORMs in C++ myself either, but certainly if you're from Java, you know of Hibernate. If you're in Rails, you know of Active Record. Laravel and PHP has its own ORM. So this is a very familiar concept to a lot of different languages. It's just that this is one that's very popular in the .NET world. Yes, very good question. Thank you for Ravi. So the last one I want to talk about is one that's I think very dear to Chris as well. So I was excited that I get to do a little bit is OData, and so this is where you can query. Well, maybe I'll let Chris explain it.
Yeah, so OData is a protocol. So the great thing about a protocol is you get the contract for the protocol, and the implementation can be anything that you want. So, and what OData will do is think of it as writing a link statement onto a URL or a URI. And what you're doing is you're telling, you're giving a command that's going to go across HTTP, and when it gets to the other side, to that OData endpoint, it will come in. The OData library will break up that command that's on the you can think of it as the URL or the web link, and it will then go, in our case, go into EF Core and then build out a SQL statement or a query statement that will go back to the database. But there's lots of different implementations of OData, and so entity framework is just one way that we can use OData. But I always think of it as building CRUD across HTTP, across the wire, and then getting those results back in your HTTP response. And usually you get it back in JSON in the HTTP response body.
So with all these different libraries, and these are all things you could do already with Couchbase for sure. But since there's an EF Core provider, these things become a whole lot easier to just start using them right out of the box. And that's what I want to kind of show in action here. So I want to show a little bit of this, and this is why I have a separate demo app from Contoso, because I have these third-party integrations built into this. So I want to bring up identity first, and so I've got a if I can find it here. Yes, it's another DbContext. This is a special one because it inherits from identity DbContext. So this comes from this ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core integration. And inside of this, I just am specifying, okay, these are the different identity entities. that's a hard thing to say. And how they correspond to various Couchbase collections. So you saw those earlier when I was browsing a database. All these collections already created here. And so once those are created, that's really all you need to do is wire up this context, and you have these all these different entities ready to go. And then you can start doing things with identity and login. So here's the setup for that. Again, almost identical to the one for widget. We're just setting up the same connection string and the same credentials, things like that. And then if I go over to my users controller, sorry, not users controller, auth controller, you can see I've got, this is a pretty standard controller for handling auth in ASP.NET Core. So you've got a register form and register view, a login page and a logout page, right? So if I go back to the browser here, I'll go over to home, and I can go ahead and register a new user. So right now you can see I've got 2 users in there. I'm going to create a new user. So we'll say Chris at example.org, and we'll have to give him a real password, otherwise it'll give me an error message. So we'll put that in there. And so by doing that, now I've used Entity Framework to go ahead and create a new user in here. Here's Chris. And notice it's got all the correct password hashes and email address and all these other things that are needed for ASP.NET identity processing and handling, two-factor authentication, things like that. And further, if we go over to roles, you can see we've got this custom role. So you can actually create custom roles that correspond to different features of your application and give those to specific users. Now, I give them to every user just because it's a demo, but this is just a mapping between a user and a role. And this is all part of the identity provider that we're getting via Entity Framework in ASP.NET Core. And we're doing this with very, very little code, very little any sort of plumbing or configuration. So we've got identity, login, logout, and users all there for very little extra coding for us. And so there's a list of all the users in our system, which I'm also getting via a LINQ query to show those off. So that's one thing that's great, is identity is right there and built in. Chris, have you used identity before? You're familiar with this?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's lots of different, and you don't have to. I believe EF Core has multiple identity methods also. So this is just the way that we can do it through ASP.NET and using those tables. But there's also other ways that we can do identity also that may not put it into your database, but can access things like identity server and Okta and even going and querying against Azure. So if you were going to do single sign-on or have people log in using what used to be what we think of as Active Directory, which is now Entra, and we can store all those users up in Azure. So yep,
Certainly.
use a lot of the different identity.
Sure, certainly you could use one of those third-party ones. One of the things that a lot of Couchbase customers use, I don't know if you're familiar with this, Chris, but user profiles are a common use case for Couchbase. So I think one of our marketing departments calculated we have through our various customers, we have somewhere like 20 billion user profiles stored across
Oh
the globe in
wow.
Couchbase. So things like LinkedIn and PayPal and things are. So this is certainly a type of use case that's right up Couchbase's alley, is storing those profiles, whether you store auth or not, storing profiles there in Couchbase.
Yeah.
So the next one I want to show is GraphQL, and this is through a library called Hot Chocolate, right? Hot Chocolate? Yes, Hot
It's
Chocolate.
hot chocolate.
Hot
Yeah.
chocolate, yeah. And so this is all you need to do basically to set this up is just add GraphQL server and add a query type. And then this query type is a separate object. You'll see this here. I'll bring it up for a second. All this is doing is just saying, okay, I'm going to use this entity framework context to provide a query interface to my widgets. And so I have this down here. I think it might be one other. Yeah, map GraphQL. So that's just actually map it to a URL. So if we bring this up here, we can go to GraphQL endpoint. And nice thing about this one is that we get a nice little UI as well that we can start to enter GraphQL objects into. So for instance, I've got this query here. I just pasted this in from a upcoming blog post I'm working on. I'm not really a GraphQL expert, but this is querying widgets where the name contains this word foo, and it's ordering them. This is kind of like your query before, Chris. And it's ordering them by created date in descending order, and it's selecting these specific fields, right? So it's very much like a query language of its own. So I'll go ahead and run this, and there's the results. We'll just have the one that has the word foo in it there. We could probably expand this to be, I don't know, something more general, like, well, no, I guess not. A maybe? I don't know. Yeah, there we go.
There we
Now
go.
we've got 4 of them, and they're ordered by created date, descending order. So this is an interface that's used by JavaScript front ends and other type of situations where you want to consume data from a GraphQL API. So have you used GraphQL before, Chris?
A little bit. I'm like you. I know it has its purpose, but haven't really had a need to use it up until now. I know lots of people that do.
Yeah, but once again, if you could create a GraphQL interface for Couchbase, but it's a lot of work to wire it up. With this, it's just we already have the entities created. We just expose them to GraphQL via Hot Chocolate, and away we go. We've got the interface going. So the one last thing I want to show is OData. And so for this, I've got again, just another line of configuration here. Actually, it's just this part right here. Actually, it's even less than that. It's just this part. So I'm saying, again, I want to set up an OData convention model builder, and for a specific entity set is widget. And this is all the things we want to enable. We want to enable filtering and order by and all those sorts of things. And so this will give us a OData URL route there. So for instance, I don't know how well you can see this if I bring up the browser here. But up here you can see I've got /OData/widgets, right? And then this is the actual expression that Chris was talking about. So I'm filtering price greater than 1 and order by name. All right. So that's kind of the expression, the OData expression that's in there. Whoops, that's the wrong link. Sorry about that. And so we execute this, and it's going to be, and we'll print this, and that's going to be the results. So we've got these 4 OData objects that are being returned, again, through Entity Framework via this OData API. And so, some of the things you can do with OData are things like Excel and Power BI and other tools like that, Chris, is that right?
Yeah, so the great thing about OData is because it's a protocol, everyone has to adhere to the protocol. So if I build an OData endpoint, any client or any code that can access and query OData should have the ability to get in there and query stuff. The other nice thing is it has metadata built in. So it's not really showing right here, but if I set up paging, I can say like, hey, like get a certain page out of my database. It will give me a previous and a next URL that will go back to the client, so the client doesn't have to figure out what the next page or the previous page was. So you can get lots of nice things, and also if you build it right and you query it, you can actually get the types back. So I know in Couchbase you may not have a lot of that potentially, but say you want to know that something's a string or something's an int or something's a float or decimal, it will tell you what the types are coming back in the JSON. You just have to set that up and return that metadata. So for me, the great thing is it's a protocol, so everyone implements it the same way, and the metadata that comes back in the OData response payload.
And I assume if it's using the types from the C# object, then that's going to work fine with Couchbase too, because it's going to
Yes.
also use, the widget. The
Yep.
widget entity has those types. So
yes, you're right.
Great.
And so it will tell you that you have a string. GUID would be a string, and you get all the other types. But that's kind of nice because then the client or whatever is calling the OData knows what the type is, so it can hydrate objects in whatever language based on that metadata.
So I just kind of chose these libraries because they were popular, and I thought they would be cool if they could work directly with Couchbase. There's probably hundreds or thousands other EF Core libraries integrations out there. If you have one that you like and you want to see if it works with Couchbase, you can feel free to contact me. Happy to give that a try, see if it works. So yeah, I just picked those 3. I just sorted by NuGet most popular, and those are the first 3 I came across I thought would be cool to try. So there's tons more out there. But that's kind of what I wanted to show was those third-party integrations, which is, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Chris, but certainly one of the best things about EF Core is all those third-party libraries out there.
Yeah. So there's lots of different ways to utilize EF Core, the data coming back, and yeah. So that's one of the strengths, is that it's a mature framework. It's a mature ORM that lots of people use and build technology around it.
So a couple quick notes so that engineering and support don't freak out on me. I want to just mention that
Oh,
sorry.
you're on mute. Yep.
Yes. I just wanted to a couple notes here so engineering and support don't freak out on me. This is early days for the EF Core for Couchbase provider. It's not like officially supported by Couchbase Incorporated right now. It's a community type license. So forums, Discord, Stack Overflow, GitHub issues, things like that. We do have some great .NET engineers and responsive engineers at Couchbase, and some great .NET developers in the Couchbase community who are very helpful. One of those being Brant Burnett, who might still be hanging around. And it's open source as well, like Entity Framework. So you can jump in and help and submit pull requests and submit bugs and all that kind of stuff. It's all out there for you to work on. One thing I want to mention is, EF Core has a massive feature set. You saw Chris's set of demos, and that's just a small percentage, really, of what EF Core can do. Even the most mature EF Core implementations, like SQL Server, there are still some. You can still type in some LINQ queries that are just not supported. Right? It's just basically an infinite problem space. But that being said, there are some things that we know EF Core for Couchbase does not support just yet. And so if you want to see the full list, you can go to the documentation there. Eager loading is not supported just yet. Migrations are not supported, which might not be that big of a deal because it's not relational. So there's not like you have to update your tables with different data types and columns, things like that. But it is something you should know about. One of the big ones for me is subdocument. So nested objects, JSON within JSON is an important feature. Not quite supported just yet for this first version. Pessimistic locking is not there yet. It's supported by Couchbase, but it's not supported by EF Core. And then same thing with index consistency levels. If you're familiar with Couchbase, you know what index consistency levels are. You can't specify those with EF Core. You get the default level for now. So again, these are all things that kind of get out the door to version 1. I want to make sure you don't walk away from the session thinking you can switch from SQL Server to Couchbase by just changing a connection string. Right? It's going to be more work than that. Maybe you can in some situations. I love you to try it, but it's probably not going to get you all the way there. And honestly, going from like SQL Server to Postgres, probably not going to get you all the way there. There's some work you have to do. So, but if your company's working on a project and you want to use EF Core, please let us know. It's going to help us to prioritize and expedite features. So I just wanted you to know that there are some things that we know about that aren't supported in this very first version. Next steps. So if you want to try using EF Core with Couchbase, I'd suggest you join our Discord. There's the SDKs channel in there specifically, and let's discuss. What are you trying to build, and what's your use case, and what are you running into? Also, check out the GitHub repo. That's where the Contoso sample app is. That's going to help you get started really quickly with EF Core for Couchbase. If you're interested in EF Core in general, you should definitely be attending the EF Core community stand-ups. We've worked closely with the Microsoft team actually on this EF Core provider, and Chris has worked with them as well. These guys have a tremendous amount of knowledge and perspective on Entity Framework as a whole, not just SQL Server, but as a whole, the whole ecosystem. And Couchbase is going to be on the next episode as well, coming up in July 17th, so you don't want to miss that. My sample code that I showed you today is on GitHub. You can go to the link right there, mainly if you're interested in those third-party integrations. And I have a blog post coming up to walk you through that soon. I also want to give Chris a chance to promote his stuff some more, certainly his code samples. But anything else you want to talk about, Chris? Anything going on that people should know about?
No, I will be building a very advanced EF Core course for the Update Conference team. So Update Conference is a conference that is in Prague and Krakow, Poland, but they are going to be releasing some courses that people can buy and go through. And I'm going to, like I said, build out an EF Core course, mainly around like how to get as much efficiency, performance, and all the goodness out of EF Core. So yeah. And To go back, you can find those demos. Just go out to C Woodruff is my GitHub name account, and just look up EF Core demos, and it should all be out there.
If people want to contact you, Chris, what's the best way for them to do so?
Probably email. So cwoodruff@live.com, or they can find me on Mastodon or Blue Sky or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is another way, and I think I'm Chris.Woodruff is my username on LinkedIn.
You can also find me on email there on the screen, Matthew.Groves@Couchbase. I'm also on X, mgroves, and I'm also on LinkedIn as well. Matthew Groves on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Do we have any other questions in the chat? We have time for some questions now. So if you were thinking about typing something in, now's your chance. There's a general question here from Ravi. Maybe you can handle this one, Chris, if you got some ideas. Completed my college. I want to be a database architect. What can I do next?
Oh, wow. Well, you can kind of learn as much as you can about different databases. If you want to, I would really learn how to model different databases, and that's not only relational, but that's also uh, these NoSQL databases. You still need to model your NoSQL databases like buckets and collections inside of Couchbase, to make sure that that if you are going to join anything, that those joins are efficient and have good indexes on them.
Yeah, and I'd say in general, if you don't already, I would recommend getting a really good grasp on SQL as a language. It's
That's
used
true.
everywhere on relational databases, and more and more on non-relational databases like Couchbase. So if you've got a pretty good solid foundation on SQL, and like Chris was saying on modeling, you're going to be in a great place to work with databases, understand how to build indexes and how to scale them out, and how to handle distributing them, and all those kinds of things that go with being a DBA.
Yeah. Yep. Good luck. It's a great career.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions there in the chat. Maybe we can just verify with Brian real quick before we close things up. But Chris, I want to say thank you very much for joining us today. This has been excellent, as always, and I appreciate you joining us to talk about Entity Framework.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Always good to connect with you and catch up.
And thanks again to Brian for helping us get this thing up and running and handling all the administration.
Yep.
And hope
Thanks,
you all have
Brian.
a great day.